that light make you look better?
Yeah. Thanks.
Hey, John,
Yeah.
sent Hannah a note today and I've not received anything back yet, so we're still waiting in the queue, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I lost it. Never mind.
We got 12 people. We'll wait a few more minutes.
Hey, Steve,
Yeah,
I went back the other day to Central Park.
today you did?
No, today. And fishing was really slow. I couldn't believe it. And then all of a sudden, I caught,
I'm sorry, you're cutting out.
yeah. Well, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it really turned on, and the gills were biting like crazy. And I mean, big ones, big gills.
Good.
My first fish I caught was a bass.
Well, there you go.
Completely unexpected.
Any size?
Yeah, it was sized about
What'd you-
12, it was about 12 inches.
What'd you use, Chris?
It was like a a bluegill bug with chenille and rubber legs.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. It was fun.
Well, I guess the temperature was different today too. I know when you and I went, it was slow at the beginning, picked up, then we had a little lull, and then it picked up as I left again. And you were catching.
It was crazy that day. I mean, after you left, I caught, I don't know, 20, 25.
After I left? Holy
Yeah.
smokes.
But yesterday, it was high pressure, it was sunny, and I just figured they were just turned off. And I thought, oh, this is going to be a waste of time. And then all of a sudden, kaboom. Yeah,
Yeah.
You-
Well, good.
You never know.
never know.
Well, I have to try to get out there again and meet you out there one day. I went to the doctor about my knee, and it looks like I'm going to have it scoped out. So I'm going to see the surgeon on the 6th, and he may have to do some cleaning up on that meniscus.
Okay. He didn't draw any fluid out?
Nope. He said, no, he didn't want to draw any fluid or give me another cortisone. He just said, basically sweat it out, take a little pain medication he recommended until the surgeon sees me. So I'm going to be limping around for a few weeks, I guess.
My opinion on that is I would do anything to avoid them sticking a scope in my knee.
Well, I'm having a hell of a time walking around is the problem.
I don't understand why you wouldn't just draw the fluid out one more time. I don't get that.
He said there wasn't enough in there because the pain is in the lower part of the knee and there's not as much fluid as there was last time.
Yeah.
He thinks it's more the pain that's affecting my walking than the fluid this time, which I think he's right because it's nowhere near as solid as it was before.
Yeah, but a cortisone shot, Steve, really takes care of the pain, though.
Well, I had a cortisone shot.
Oh,
And
you
it worked
did?
for about, yeah, he drained a lot of fluid and he gave me a cortisone shot. It worked pretty good for about 5 days. And after that, that was it.
Oh,
Okay, guys, it's 5 after. Let's get this thing started. So,
Okay.
I would ask Jim Guerra to talk about education, but I don't see Jim. Chris.
Yeah.
What's up with you?
Well, there's nothing to talk about for
Besides
ways-
bluegill.
besides bluegill. Yeah. Heard an interesting YouTube yesterday with Tim Rosenbauer on Orvis interviewing Carolyn from River Run about tailwaters, in particular Taneycomo. It was very interesting.
huh.
Yeah. Basically, if you're going to fish Taneycomo, don't bother unless you're coming with gray and tan scuds and a Ruby 2 and maybe some sculpin jigs. And if the water's high, bring some cerise worms. Blake knows all about that.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
That's-
we'll hear it, I'm sure.
That's like the standard Taneycomo package. Has anybody done a guide with Carolyn?
Jerry, did you do it?
Not yet,
Somebody.
but I do have a coupon to do it, with her. I was kind of thinking later this fall. I don't know.
Yeah, I think they had trouble booking her. I think she got booked up in when we went down as a club. I don't think she was available. I don't think. So, but
Man.
That-
Hey, Blake, I want to thank you for loaning us your rods that time that we did a guide with your.
Oh, was that you who came down and went out with oh gosh.
Back, Zeke.
Um
Had a funny
Tracy Frenzel, I believe, was your guide that day.
Frenzel, that's it. Yeah, that was me.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, no problem at all. I'm glad that it worked out.
He brought mostly spinning rods with jigs, and after about an hour or two, I said, hey, I'd like to try that jig. He said, let me just give it a shot. First cast, boom, 17 incher.
Hmm.
20, I took 20 casts, nothing. And about an hour before we finished, he threw it out again and caught a big mother 19 incher. Son of a bitch. I'm doing the same thing you are.
I'll tell you what, the first 7 times I fished Taneycomo when I moved here, I went out and tried that marabou jig every single time and could not figure it out. And I finally stood around on the dock and watched Phil and Dwayne do it long enough that I started figuring a little more out about it. But
It's an art, keeping it off the bottom, but close to the bottom.
yep, I'd almost prefer to teach someone how to get a fly rod with an indicator in the water than to try to teach them all of the stuff it takes to jig fish.
Well, I've watched you guys do it on one cast 1,000 times, and I thought, okay, I can do that. No,
sure.
but I'd love to do it a couple more times to see if I could hook one up. But
It's definitely an effective method for catching the trout out here. And I've used it down the White River too, and it worked really well down there too.
Sculpin and Peach.
Yeah, I just left the
That's a
White
staple.
River. It was tough.
Well, when did you go there?
I was there this past weekend.
Was the water really high down there?
Yeah, it was pretty high, and the water was very cold, and it was high, and even the guides wasn't catching many fish, and a lot of smaller trout.
Yeah, right now the White River is pretty blown out because of the flooding that happened about a month and a half ago. So they'll probably
Yeah.
still be running some high water for the next month, maybe even a little more before they get to some normal levels.
Only thing exciting happened. I don't know if you're familiar with the bridge in Cotter. I actually had a picture of it, but my phone got wet. The guy jumped off the bridge on top of the arch into the river. Some guy in a boat went and pulled him out.
The hell?
Okay, moving on to our meeting. I don't see Al Boros out there. I don't see David out there. I see Steve Lekich though. We got any money?
Yeah, we got 2 new members this last month, $70 in income. And I paid a $300 bill for these decals that Al ordered for the Ozark fly fishers. And that's really the only 3 transactions that we had this month. Again, without any activities and stuff, it's pretty slow. Chris, you need to go out, and when you're fishing Central Park, just because we don't have meetings doesn't mean you can't sell raffle tickets on the bridge while you're fishing.
We ought to have a impromptu club meeting out there.
There you go.
Bluegill
Yeah, I like
contest.
that idea.
Yeah.
Make an outing of it.
You guys know where we're talking about, Central Park?
No.
Just southwest of Chesterfield Mall, there's a huge park they built, and the lake they put in 1994, you talk catfish, bass, and bluegill, and I think crappie, right, Steve?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And holy crap, that is a well-managed catch and release lake. Probably about, what would you say, about 5, 6, 7 acres?
Probably about 6. Yeah, it's a pretty good sized lake.
And again, Chris, where is this? In Chesterfield?
Yeah, you take Chesterfield Parkway west and head south and to Lydia Hill Drive, and take a right on Lydia Hill Drive and you go to the stop sign, turn right, and then you'll turn into the parking lot. And then you'll just take the path down the hill to the lake. It won't take you long to find.
It's right behind the amphitheater, right?
Yeah, behind the amphitheater. You can park it by the amphitheater and walk down that way too, Jerry.
Okay. And what's the
you-
name of the park again?
Central Park.
Central Park. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
I'll check it
but
out.
Jerry, you may not want to go because the fish are bigger than the ones you're used to catching.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Bye, Steve.
I could mute him, I guess.
Yeah, unbelievable, beautiful park. And, you know, a lot of hot women giving their babies a stroll.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
that's-
Joggers, you know, dog walkers.
All right, guys, I don't
I
see,
were out there on Monday, and I don't think we saw 3 people out there.
Well, it was kind of rainy off and on.
I don't see Scott out there. Jacob said he has no report, but if everyone could remember to send me their newsletter content the first week of every month, I'd appreciate it. It's pretty thin, that the newsletter does. And he could use some updates. So yeah, send them your fishing reports, guys. Something, anything. It's getting kind of thin, so. All right. I don't see Steve Anson that got here either. That just leaves me, and all I gotta say is Montauk, we've got about 7 or 8 rooms rented now, and we're gonna have a pretty good showing out there. Should be fun next month. Oh, there's Joe. And it's gonna be good. So we are gonna do water quality management, take stream samples, etc. And it won't be quite as big as years past, but we'll have a good crowd out there. So we'll look to see you guys out there. I think all the reserved rooms have been taken. I think so. You can try. See who else is in here? Nobody.
On Sunday.
What about Sunday?
We'll be coming back from the 11 point on Sunday, Fish Montauk.
Promises, promises. You gonna stay Sunday night?
John's got a life. I don't have a life.
Well,
He's got a job and 2 kids.
that's a problem. Okay, moving on. Then we have our guest speaker tonight is Blake Wilson from Lily's Landing down at Taneycomo, and he's usually down on the dock or in a boat somewhere down there and catching fish and teaching people how to catch fish. So he says he lives and breathes Taneycomo trout. Breathing trout isn't really good. I think I would rather breathe oxygen, but you know how it goes. That's just crazy. But I'm going to let you take it right now, Blake.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, guys. I can tell you, you can breathe trout through a face mask a little bit easier. If anybody's got any questions to start it off, anything you'd like to know, maybe get the conversation steered that direction.
Blake, when I started fishing Taneycomo many years ago, I was pretty new to the sport, and everybody was telling me to use little tiny scuds, 18s, nothing bigger than a 16. Now, all of a sudden, people are using 12s, even 10s.
Yep.
With that.
So now I don't know when it is that you started fishing Taneycomo.
12 years ago.
How many?
12, 15.
Yeah. So 12 to 15 years ago, as far as I understand, because I haven't been fishing Lake Taneycomo that long, they had a lot more periods of time with the water off. And so anytime they turn the water off or even slow it down to a minimal flow, you do have to downsize, from your 4-pound lines and your 5X tippets to 6, or sometimes in the summer, if the water's off and it's a really, the water clarity is great. You even have to sometimes go to 7X. It can make the difference between catching fish and not catching fish. And that would also be a time when you're switching to those size 16 midges and scuds, or 18s, or even a 20. I've never used a 20 here before, but there have been times like last summer, we had half unit flows and then they were turning the water off the other part of the day, and we did have to throw the size 16 and the size 18 in order to effectively catch the trout on the scuds. But this, the last 3 years that I've been here, we've had flood stages every single year. Just like right now, they're still trying to run the water out of Beaver Lake and out of Table Rock, and trying to keep the White River and Bull Shoals from going over their flood pool. And so we're seeing heavier flows. Like this last week, we've seen 2 units all day with a period of 3 or 4 units turned on. And so whenever you've got water moving that fast, that's when you switch to those size 12s, those size 10s. We call the size 10 a half cat because it takes about a half a cat to tie one worth of dubbing. But that's kind of what it's been. We went through a ton of thousands of size 12 scuds when the floodgates were running about 2-3 weeks ago now.
Okay. So it's flow.
Right. Yeah. For me, the faster the water, usually the bigger the presentation.
Okay.
Whether you're talking about scuds or midges or San Juan worms or mega worms or any of those kind of things that tend to work pretty good out here. Faster water, bigger presentation; slower water, smaller presentation.
Okay.
Blake, with as much rain as that the state has had, do you anticipate them running a lot of water for a long period of time?
So we made it to a point a few weeks ago, whenever we were having all those rain systems, where Beaver Lake, which is above Table Rock, was completely maxed out at its flood pool. If it had even rained an inch more, they would have had to have, done a big release, which would have probably flooded our, part of our resort here. Luckily, we didn't get any more after that. But what it means now is that they're going to be running this heavy flow 2, 3, 4 units. Just in my guess from the year past and the year before that, probably for the next month and a half before they get those lakes down to the level they need to be at. So we may not be looking at slower flows until probably August, if I had to guess here.
So definitely no wade fishing.
No, minimal wade fishing for sure. You're going to be really limited on the places, especially if you're driving and then walking in. There's maybe just a few more places that you could that could be wadeable if you had a boat to get to them. We've got a few islands, like Lookout Point Island. You could even with 2 units, it's still got a lot of ground around it that you could pull and anchor a boat off to, and it's got some different types of structure and water movement in there that's pretty conducive for wade fishing and fly fishing in there. So that's definitely a possibility. And then the island, what we call Big Island, which is right across from Lookout Point. You could do the same thing. It's got a bunch of eddy water. It's a really good spot where midges hatch a lot. I know Carolyn, they take their drift boats in behind that Big Island, and they'll sit there and they'll throw those ruby reds, and they do really well back there. And that's another spot you could pull in your boat and anchor and wade.
I thought there was a place you could drive across the dam, and on the other side, there was a place you could walk in and wait there
Oh.
too.
Yeah, sometimes I forget about that just because I never drive over there. But yeah, so you've got the hatchery side, which you get to from 165. And if you continue on 165 past the hatchery, you can go over Table Rock Dam. Right there on the other side of the bridge, there's a left-hand turn that goes down into a park. And you can get, I've never been all the way down in there, but I know that you can. There's a few different parking lots along that road where you can get pretty close to Trophy Run. And there's some spots where you can walk in. Now that side of the lake is a little bit deeper for the most part, the south bank there. So once you walk down, you're still going to be limited on the number of spots you could stand with a pair of waders. Somewhere, I think the last parking lot there, you can walk down the bank from there and get in. There's a giant sycamore tree just right below where that parking lot comes out at. And that's actually a flat back in there. You could walk through the woods and then get in there. It's probably shallow enough that you could wade that entire flat. That's a great spot that I go to drift scuds and stuff under an indicator. Even from a boat in the summer. Any of those flats like that are usually really prime spots to drift scuds.
Thank you. Come on, guys, he's getting off easy here.
Dan,
There we
do you
go.
want us to ask more questions, or is Blake
Yes.
going to do a presentation?
I don't know, Blake, what are you doing?
Oh, well, I don't really have any presentation per se. If you guys just have questions about it, I'm more than willing,
I got a question. When I was at White, I never fished with two nymphs or scuds on above a float. But my problem was I got frustrated because I kept getting twisted and tangled up. Still haven't figured out what I was doing wrong there.
So I like to start off tandem, with either like a midge with a scud dropper, or, if I'm really trying to target in on what scud is working the best. Now, Dan said it earlier, but gray or tan scuds usually, but there's a lot of varieties of those colors, and sometimes it doesn't matter, but I find that like we've got and I think Hairline makes the dubbing for it, but it's called a light rainbow shade dubbing. That's probably one of my favorite scuds out here. It works a lot of the time. We've got a color here called Peppy. It was actually a guest here. His name is Roland Duffield. His dog's name was Peppy, and the dog had the perfect shade of gray on its fur, so they would shave it each year and use its hair for dubbing, and that's how that scud got its name. But it's just kind of it's a grayish, peppery looking scud. It's got, a little bit of black and mixed into the gray, and that's probably my all-time favorite scud out here. It seems to work almost all of the time. And then anytime we have good high sun, those the UV light gray or the UV gray is another one of the ones that I go to. But basically what I'll do with a tandem rig is I'll start off and, let's say they're running, I don't know, a unit and a half or 2 units. I will tie on a size 14, in one color, and then a size 16 of another color behind it. And I'll drift those. And if I've got somebody else fishing with me, we'll, put 2 different sizes and 2 different shades and just try to really dial in on what they're biting. Now, as for not getting tangled, a lot of the fishing I do, unless of course the water's off. And anytime the water's off here, I take advantage, and I love to go up there and wade around as much as possible. But the last 3 years, we really have had a lot of water running almost the whole time. So it's a lot of fishing from a boat. So what I do myself personally, and with people who maybe are less experienced with a fly rod, is we'll do what's water load casting. So setup is, let's say they're running 2 units of water. I'm going to put on a decent size indicator, something that's going to hold up the amount of split shot that I need to fish that kind of current. So let's just say I'm fishing from the cable up at the dam down to about the trophy run section, so a little over a mile. I usually try to set it for any water depth that I'm going to encounter. That way I don't have to spend a lot of time pulling it back in and adjusting the indicator. So with 2 units of water running, I know that any part that I'm going to fish in that 1.5 mile stretch there is never going to be any deeper than about 10 foot. There are like 1 or 2 spots that get deeper than that, but I'm not going to drift my boat over those. I'm going to keep the boat drifting in the areas where I know it's going to be the most effective. And so I'll have my, medium size indicator up top. I'll have about 11 to 12 feet of available leader and tippet together. And so I'll set, let's just say specifically dragging scuds. I'm going to set the indicator and then down to my split shot. Now the amount of split shot, that's going to vary depending on how fast the water is. Really what you want to see is that indicator kind of ticking the bottom, or that weight ticking the bottom, and seeing that indication on your indicator. And then behind that, I'm going to have either my 1 or 2 scuds. If it's just 1 scud, I've probably got about 20 inches between the split shot and the scud. And if I'm running tandem scuds, then I'm going to have about 12 to 14 inches from the split shot to my first scud, and then about another 10 or 12 inches to the second scud. But ideally, I always want my depth from my indicator to my split shot to be deep enough that that split shot's always hitting the bottom, but not so heavy that it's catching the bottom all the time. And that's going to keep me from having to adjust the depth of my indicator all the time, which, more time in the water with your flies on the bottom is always better. And so for casting, to prevent all the tangling, what we do is we're water loading. And all you do is you pick your rod up to that 10 o'clock position, you flip it all the way back behind you until it lands on the water, and then you just lob it forward. Maybe not the prettiest looking thing in the world, but it does keep your tangles to a minimum. And like I said, what I'm talking about right now is for those heavier flows. If they get to running hardly any water, then you can go back to more of a traditional really small indicator, barely any split shot, if not just weighted scuds by themselves. But like I said, the last 3 years, and if the pattern continues, then whenever you're fishing from a boat here with a fly rod, then you're looking at using a good amount of leader. Now, the good thing about heavy water is you can go with heavier tippet. You can use your 5Xs and your 4Xs, and you don't break off as many fish setting the hook. But it does require a lot of leader and bigger indicators and more weight, and casting it, just using the water load cast to get it in front of you and get it drifting with the boat.
Now, hey, Blake,
Yeah.
tying your dropper on, are you tying on to the hook bend or the eye, or how are you doing that?
So whenever I rig mine up specifically, and there's multiple ways to do it. I don't think any of them are necessarily wrong, but whenever I set mine up, I'll run my, put a new leader on if I know I'm going out and fishing for a full day. Full 9-foot 5X leader is what I usually use. I usually use 5X or 5-weight rods here whenever I go out. But I'll tie, let's say I know that they're running 3 units of water, and I know that the places I'm going to be fishing, I'm going to need at least 11 foot deep, so I'm going to tie on my 9-foot leader and then 4 foot of tippet. And then I run my first fly up the line, leave a long tag in, however long I want in between them, tie it with an improved clinch knot, cinch it down, and then I just tie my next fly on to the end of the tag end.
Okay.
And I don't seem to find many problems with it. I think it holds just about as well as tying onto the bend of the hook. You just have one less step. And if I can get away with it, the place where I connect my tippet and my leader is generally where I try to make the split shot set above. That way I'm not having to tie an extra knot in my leader to hold the split shot up and not slide back down the line. Now, sometimes if the water's running fast enough, I can't quite get away with that in order to have the proper distance between my split shot and my flies. But if I can get away with it, I do, because that's just one less spot for a weak line.
Ever
that's
use tippet rings?
Do what now?
Ever use tippet rings?
Yeah, so whenever I first started fly fishing, I'm originally from Columbia, Missouri, so me and my stepdad would drive down to Bennett Springs like once a week and fish. And I started off using furled leaders that had the little metal ring already tied into the end of them, and then you just tie your tippet onto that. But since I've been fishing here on Tanny, I have not used any tippet rings. However, I do like them.
it seems like the situation we're talking about would lend itself to a drop shot situation with your weight at the very, very tip, and then your scuds tied off of, a foot above, 2 feet above. So you have less of a hinge effect. I realize your water load cast kind of minimizes that likelihood of getting that flip that causes the tangles that he was referring to. Have you ever tried that, the drop shot weight?
So I have not tried the drop shot weight on a fly rod. We've used similar method to drag flies with spin cast rods, and now that you mention it, I might have to go out there and give it a try and just play with that a little bit. I have not tried that. I've done a little bit of if any of you guys are familiar with going salmon fishing in Michigan or Alaska, they do the chuck and duck method.
Right.
With the shooting line and everything. I've done that here. Go up to like Point Lookout, get out, wade right there, and do the chuck and duck and let it drift out in front of me, and that can be pretty effective. But I have not tried a drop shot underneath my fly rod yet, so that might be worth a try.
Well, Kelly Gallup was the one who first, turned me on to that idea. And honestly, I haven't tried it either, but I keep thinking I got to do that. It seems so logical, particularly for fairly fast water where you need a chunk of weight.
Right.
Well, Chris, when you're talking about a drop shot, you're not necessarily talking about using a drop shot weight itself like they do for spinning. You could just put your BBs down at the very tip and just bounce those along the bottom, right?
It's just drop shot weighting means that your weight is the terminal
Right.
portion.
Okay. Not necessarily the drop shot weight that's designed with the little wire tip and all that.
You could use a dumbbell, weight, with that little eyelet on it. That would certainly be, especially when you need something a little heavier, or just, put your split shot on the very tip.
Mhm.
Yep.
And that keeps your line, straighter. And then you'd have to tie your midges on with tags. You
Right.
wouldn't tie it off the bend. That wouldn't work. You'd have to have tags.
Yeah, I mean, I think, once again, whenever you're drifting anytime, the straighter the line, the more chance you have of setting the hook on the fish. You're gonna have a better chance of it whenever you've got a whole bunch of tag weight here and you've got those flies kind of waving behind the weight. Then you take a chance at not being able to set the hook because there's not a perfect tension in that line. So yeah, you gave me something to think about there. I might have to get out there and try that.
All right. I'll check back with you in a few weeks.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Blake,
Hey, I'll tell you what, I'll just get out and do it on the one cast video and we'll all find out together.
Okay. Cool.
Blake, I understand that with the scud population in Lake Taneycomo, that when the water recedes, the scuds die, and then when the water comes back up, those dead scuds turn to like a pinkish color, and when the water's rising, pink is a good color.
Yeah, the ones that I've seen that die off kind of, I call it a pinkish color, maybe even more of a salmon. You know what like the salmon's meat looks like, or a trout's meat looks like whenever it's been eating natural food sources. They kind of turn that orangish pink. And so great time to use those orange scuds or pink scuds is, like you said, when the water slows down or whenever they crank the water up really high. So, they've been running nice, even flows, nice slow flows, and then all of a sudden floodgates come on. Well, all those scuds that have been repopulating and growing and hiding get pushed out from their hiding spots, and sometimes it's too fast, and so that'll kill them off too. So anytime they crack the floodgates here, or they go from a really slow flow to a really fast one, that's a great time to get those orange scuds out of the box.
I guess I could ask the next question. In nymph fishing, I was always taught by the guys in the club, let's say you're fishing 6 foot of water. You always want 1.5 times the depth of the water to make sure your scuds or your nymphs are down low enough. So in 6 foot of water, you'd be using like 9 foot. Now you were saying if you're fishing 10 foot depth of water over those flats that are flooded with 2 or 3 gates open, that you're using like 11 foot. Then you're not following that rule. Is that?
So in a sense, yes, but I'm also using a lot of weight. So I could cancel the plan on using a lot of split shot, and I could still use a very minimal amount, but then I would have to use the rule of 1.5 times, because you're accounting for how much line it's going to take with that current in order to get it down at the the depth that you need it to be. So for say, like one time I got out there and they were running 4 units of water, which is the max amount of generators that we have here. And I had about 16 foot of, leader plus tippet. And I was just running a San Juan worm, a weighted San Juan worm by itself with no split shot, but it took that full 16 foot of leader underneath the indicator in order to get it to where it needed to be to catch fish. So
Okay.
yeah, essentially, but whenever I'm doing it under an indicator, I'm usually using enough weight to kind of get rid of having to have all that extra leader.
Which goes back to the comment you made. You're trying to fish as vertical as possible.
Right. Right. Now, of course, I've still got that, 12 to 24 inches where my scuds are at behind the weight. And of course, that line isn't perfectly vertical. It's the line from where the indicator to the split shot is perfectly vertical to the bottom. And I know that it's hitting the bottom whenever I get enough weight on there by looking and seeing the indicator getting ticked across the rocks.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
However, you can get it to bounce along the bottom is kind of the rule, right?
Right. Yeah. So anytime you're fishing just about anything here, um, and you're dragging it across the bottom like a scud or any kind of bait, ideally you want that nice, you want it to be even with the flow. You want to have it ticking across the bottom, whatever it is, with a 1 to 2 second pause in between. If it seems like it's just dragging the bottom the whole time, you're just getting a constant feel across the bottom, it probably isn't presenting very naturally to the fish. As if a scud was going down the middle of the stream, it wouldn't be getting stuck on the bottom. So you want it that nice 1 to 2 second bounce. If you're not feeling it or seeing it on your indicator, if you're using something that's hitting the bottom, if you're not seeing that, or you're not feeling that, then you're probably not quite where you need to be with either your leader length or with your weight. Now, some other stuff that we do out here, like the last week and a half, fishing a PJ's finesse micro jig or a Turner micro jig. Like a week and a half ago, we had flows. They were starting off in the morning with 1 unit, which is a pretty nice flow for fishing. We were fishing those finesse jigs underneath an indicator on the fly rod. Now, those you don't necessarily want dragging on the bottom. You want them suspended 1 to 2 foot above the bottom, kind of like if you were working a marabou jig with a spin cast rod or something. But so the idea there is that you just have enough weight in that jig head that it's primarily staying vertical underneath the indicator. Once the water picks up fast enough, that's when you have to add the split shot to keep it vertical and suspended above the bottom.
You're using like 16th ounce or 32nd ounce or
So the ones we were using, like just say with a unit running, are anywhere from a 50th ounce to a 1/100th ounce jig head with a little bit of marabou on the bottom of it.
without any split shot?
Yeah, without any split shot.
Wow. Okay.
Once again, the PJ's finesse ones that we have here, I think are 1/64th ounce. And in 1 unit, if you're just about fishing anywhere, you can get that to pretty much stay straight enough up and down underneath the indicator without adding split shot. But if
Okay.
they do pick the current up, those little tiny marabou jigs are a great option out here too, underneath an indicator, just suspended. Earlier in the morning, you're going to do better, shallower, and then as the sun comes up, you're going to have to move those deeper. But I say a rule of thumb, if you're going to suspend something and not have it dragging across the bottom, that about 1 to 2 foot above whatever depth of water you're fishing is a pretty good bet. You want it to be pretty vertical underneath your indicator.
Now, you watching one cast over the last 2 years, you guys rarely use midgets. And I'm sure that's just like, well, if we do so well on scuds, why mess with midges? But to me, another guide like Carolyn, it's like midge choice. And
Getting a little feedback on the audio here.
I think we got airball.
But so, I think it's just kind of a preference thing. We have such a population of midges here that if you take the time and dial in either method, you're going to be fairly successful every day on the water. But yeah, midges are a great option. We have this last couple days, the midge hatch has just been so thick that you can't even drive your boat on plane in the evening. And
Wow.
so it would be right now would be a prime time to be up there fishing those midges. And, I fish them a little bit, and during the middle of the day, you just drop them deeper. You find those deeper pockets,
Yeah.
go from fishing them, a foot to 2 foot in the morning, and afternoon comes and you can drop them 6 to 7 foot underneath that indicator and find those spots where the midge populations are a little more heavy, and you really just catch fish pretty well.
Blake, have you ever heard of a chocolate covered cherry?
A chocolate covered cherry.
It's basically it's a midge. It's like a zebra midge, but I believe it's red hollow tinsel covered with camel thread and red wire. Is that right? Red wire, guys? Somebody correct me. But it's apparently a very, very effective pattern for the White River system. I mean, all the way down.
Interesting.
And I think it's sort of like a cousin of the Ruby 2.
Okay.
But for some reason, that red color seems to be very effective in that fishery,
Yep.
more so the traditional zebra midge. I don't know if you found that to be true or not, but
I would definitely say that's true. One of my favorite midges to use when I do go out here is the rusty red midge, which you may be familiar with. Just kind of a duller red with the wire wrap. And then, so another one that does really well here, but it only seems to work great whenever the sun's up, is the primrose and pearl. If you're not familiar with that one, that's a great midge here anytime the sun's up. I find that when it gets cloudy, that midge doesn't work very well. But anytime the sun is up, I can almost bet I can throw on some size of primrose and pearl based on the water flow, and that's going to be a good midge. Either that or the rusty red, or I've got a whole box of ruby reds that I got from Carolyn just because I see them catching fish on them all the time.
okay, thank you.
Blake, with the amount of water that they've been running and will continue running, are people, bringing in, good reports as far as fishing, or is the fishing pretty tough?
So now that the heat wave has hit and it's been hitting the, mid 90s and 100-degree days, regardless of the water temperature here, that sun still seems to affect the fish. So, let's just go over the last, let's say, 2 weeks of fishing. We've had some slower reports in general from people, but it's definitely still good. We're still having all kinds of trophy catch and release certificates turned in. I mean, usually at least one a day. Someone that's, in affiliation with here is catching a trout that's over 20 inches long and turning it back and releasing it. And to me, that's, regardless of how slow the fishing is, if you're getting out in a 4-hour trip and you're catching a trophy sized rainbow, that's a pretty good day to me.
Hey, Blake,
Yeah.
what's the best season to fish out there?
Oh gosh. My favorite season is definitely the fall. That's whenever the brown trout do their mating run. Now, the only thing about the fall that, I could complain about maybe would be that that's generally the time when we have our lowest dissolved oxygen levels here on the lake. So, if you're fishing here in the fall and you come for the brown run, I highly suggest bumping up your rod strength to 6X or 6 weight or 7 weight, something where you don't have to play the fish quite as long. But I'd say the fall is my favorite time, and then early winter before the water gets to that below 45-degree range. The first part of the winter is probably my second favorite time to be out here.
When you say fall, are you talking September, October, November?
Yeah, September, October, November, and then getting into December, even January. Like this winter was a pretty mild winter until we had that real cold spurt for a week. And the water oxygen levels were great around October, November, somewhere in there was when Table Rock flipped over and the oxygen levels went back to, like 11, 12 parts per million. And the water temperature was still, in that 50-degree range, and the fish were just super active. It was a really great time to be on the water. But they do, whenever those water oxygen levels take a plummet, they do slow down a little bit.
I've heard that there are times that the oxygen gets so low that the MDC has to actually go out and do injections.
Yep. And we experienced that quite a bit last summer. I'd say there was an entire month and a half, almost 2 months actually, where they were injecting oxygen through the outlets and up at the generators to keep the parts per million over 4. So here the standard, because this is a lake owned by the Corps of Engineers, the water standard is only 4 parts per million, whereas the Safe Water Act, don't quote me, I think that's what it's called for Missouri, is 6 parts per million on any owned by the state lake. But because this lake falls into being owned by the Corps of Engineers, the parts per million that they have to uphold is 4 parts per million. But there were parts of the time last summer where it was dropping below that, and they were having to put in quite a bit of liquid oxygen into the water. And those were times when you really, didn't want to be on the water too much or beating up the fish too much.
Okay. That I've never even heard of that. That blew my mind.
It's something else. I hadn't heard of it until I started living here either.
Yeah, I can
But
see where
the reason it happened last year was because, once again, all the flooding last year, once the lake flips over, it holds a certain amount of dissolved oxygen throughout the, layers to the thermocline. Well, they had to run so much of the water off through the floodgates last year that what would have been stored for the fall was depleted early, and that's what caused those super low oxygen levels. So this year we did run some floodgates, but we were still running them this time last year, and so hopefully this year maybe we'll see a little bit better oxygen levels for the fish this fall, as long as we don't have some freak rain again.
Mm-hmm.
How's the fish population doing at Taneycomo?
The fish population here right now is just it's just absolutely, they're all healthy. They're the floodgates that we did run for the last, we had it come on 3 different times for different periods of time. One of them was for a month. When that happens, the scud population that's been, in hiding or somewhat, hidden along the banks, they all get rushed into the lake. The scuds increase, the water temperature at earlier time of the year increased, which increased the midge population. The sculpin fish kind of get pushed out of their hiding spots, so they're feeding on sculpins. And of course the shad come over the dam, and that's happened enough times this year that, I mean, the fish, even though the floodgates haven't been on for close to a month now, the fish are just, they're all just so, their bellies are just so packed, they're super healthy. And it's looking like at this rate that we're going to have even more trophy catch and release certificates turned in than we did last year. And I think last year we hit like 571 turned in for the year, which was a huge increase from any year before. And we really think it has to do with the amount of flooding that's happened and the way it's increased the food source for the trout over the last 3 years. And in correlation also with the conservation's efforts, they went out and did a survey, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, asking many of the fishermen here, hey, would you rather catch a quantity of fish or a quality of fish? And many people said quality. So they reduced the stocking numbers from the 750,000 to about 550,000 a year. And that's been over the period of the last 3 years now. And so what we're seeing is maybe just a few less fish being caught, but the average size of fish and the number of trophy fish has increased exponentially. And on top of those food sources, it's been really good.
So are you saying that they're stocking less fish because they're letting them grow
Right.
bigger before they actually stock them?
Well, I don't know that the stocking size itself is any bigger, but by putting a few less fish in the lake, it allows the fish that are here to eat more of, what's available as a food source, which increases their size. And we have seen a pretty significant difference in just the amount of time since they started doing that.
Well, I remember when we came down in April, when I fished with Tracy, we had a hell of a day. I don't know how many I caught, but it was probably 30. But the thing that impressed me was how, like you said, how thick they were, how healthy, and caught two 17, 18 inches or bigger, which is unusual for me, Taney. I'm usually catching stockers, and that was really kind of impressive how robust the fish were.
Yeah, and it's especially the last 2 years, maybe not so much the first year they started doing it, but these last 2 years, we're just seeing some really, really healthy big fish. I mean, for example, I went out, let's see, last week I took two buddies out night fishing. We caught 6 trout that were over 20 inches.
Whoa.
Two 23 inchers, two 22 inchers, a 21 incher, and a 20 incher. And that was in a less than a 4-hour period. And so that's just incredible, the amazing amount of healthy fish that are up there.
Were you using jerk baits or were you
I do. If anyone of you guys know Dwayne Doty, he taught me how to paint his signature series jerk baits. And so that's what we were doing that night. The water was running probably a little fast, but one of my favorite things to do during the summer at night is get up there whenever they're running half unit or less, water off with my fly rod and strip streamers. But that night we were throwing the jerk baits, and it was a good night. But there's just so many fish up there that big, and it's
streamers are not usually mentioned in talking about fishing Taneycomo, except in the fall when the browns come up. Now, what kind of streamers were you using?
Okay, so the streamer that I use the most whenever I go night fishing is the pine squirrel. And generally the 3 colors that I'll switch between is white, black, and olive. The pine squirrel is tied on about a size 10 streamer hook, sometimes a size 8. So it's not like the world's biggest streamer. It's pretty small.
When you like a little zonker, like a slump
little pine squirrel, it's just a piece of, the strip that I use is a piece of pine squirrel zonker, and then in those 3 different colors, just tied with a little tail, and then you oh man, I'm really bad with technical names sometimes, but you take the second piece, you set it on top, you tie it at the front, and then you kind of feather it so that the body looks a little bigger. You tie behind it, and I don't remember what that's called. I know how to do it, I just don't remember what it's called. But it's really simple. You just tie the tail on, you tie the body, make sure it has a little fluff to it, and you put a tiny little bead at the front. And you really don't want a lot of weight, because when you're fishing the water off, or even that half unit flow, you don't want your fly swinging to the bottom.
Yeah.
If it's swinging down and touching the bottom, you're not going to catch nearly as many fish as if you can keep it suspended right there in the middle. A lot of that water up there isn't deeper than 3 or 4 feet when you're fishing it at those levels. So you want a streamer that's light enough to stay suspended as it's slowly swinging and as you're slowly stripping it back. And that's the way that I find that I catch the most fish. I love the idea of throwing a big, gangly, ugly streamer, just because they're so cool. But a lot of the times, unless they have a good amount of float at the front of them, they sink to the bottom, and it's just not very effective. But the one that I like to use the most is the pine squirrel, followed by what they call the PMS.
Yeah, I think they call that, Blake, a pine squirrel and hurl.
Pine squirrel and hurl. Then the PMS is basically kind of the same thing. It's got marabou tail at the end instead, and it's a little bit longer, but it's a really lightweight streamer as well. And between those two, that's what I throw a lot of whenever I go streamer fishing at night up at the dam.
And you're catching rainbows, huh?
Rainbows and browns.
And browns. Okay.
Yeah. Now, the streamer fishing during the daytime here would probably be a lot better if the water was turned off a lot more. I find that the streamers work just so much better whenever the water is really slow or completely turned off. If they had the water turned off, I think you'd hear a lot more about people fishing streamers here on Taneycomo. But whenever the water's running heavy, it's a lot of work. You gotta use the big sink tips, the 150 grain, 300 grain. You just gotta rip that thing back the whole time. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, that wears your shoulder out.
Yes, it does. But at nighttime, it's just the opposite game. You're casting out there and trying to move that thing and suspend it as slowly as you possibly can through the water.
So if I'm staying at Lily's Landing, can I take a boat out at night?
Well, no. I don't think that liability wise they'd be able to
No.
accomplish that. Now, if you worked out some deal with Phil, maybe you might be able to, but you'd have to talk to the man himself.
Give him my pink slip on my car.
Yeah, I'm working on getting my captain's license right now, and I'll be offering night fishing trips once I do. And I would always be down if anybody wanted to come down and the water conditions were right and go wading. I'd be more than willing to go with anybody and go wade fish and show you my tricks and spots.
Cool.
Not that I know that much, but I do know a couple spots up there.
Yeah.
Like when you wade fish at night, I mean, is there like right after the sun goes over the cliff, or are you talking more like at midnight or what?
Anytime. So like, let's say I'm taking a boat out and it's the middle of the summer. I like to get up there before the fog comes in, and then I work my way back down the lake with the trolling motor. Now, wade fishing, I've done it where I show up right as the sun's setting, get in that good sunset bite, and then fish into the dark. And there's been other times where I've fished all night and all day, and I can't say that one time or another is better after dark. I do know that at about 1 a.m., I don't know if they feed the fish, if they have an automatic feeder up there in the hatchery. But for some reason at 1 a.m., the fish really turn on at the outlets for about 15 minutes. So I don't know if there's like an automatic feeder that comes on at the hatchery, and then that water, they can smell it, or they just know it's about to happen and they pile up at the outlets. But I do know at 1 a.m. there seems to be a pretty good bite for about 15 minutes. But so, this is just my 2 years of night fishing experience. It seems that as the moon phase changes, there will be a specific time, a window of time where the bite's really good. And it's usually as the moon gets fuller, they seem to bite kind of earlier. And then as the moon, wanes and gets smaller, they seem to be a better bite, in that 1-2 a.m. area. Not that the bite can't be good the whole time, but there's just this window of time as the moon changes that seems to affect how good the bite is in that certain time. But I've fished all night long many a times out here and caught fish all night.
Cool.
All right, guys, any last questions here?
Well, I guess I could give you a hard time because I'll ask Blake. You said gray was one of your favorite scuds, that pepper gray or whatever that you call it.
Peppy gray, yeah.
Yeah, pepper gray. Is that the same color as Dan's beard? Maybe if he shaved that, we could sell it for dubbing material, raise some money for the group.
I think if you just mix a little extra pepper in there, that might do the trick.
Well, we don't like go ZZ Top, then you have plenty of it. Any other intelligent comments? All right, Blake. Yeah, thank you guys. It's been good, and we'll see you. Some of you out at Montauk, I think, and it's going to be fun out there, I believe. And thank you so much, Blake. And we will be down to see Lily's Landing, I'm sure, a few times
Awesome.
soon.
Yeah, come down and see me. I'll go out fishing with you.
And especially if you give us a hot flash of something that's working good, let us know, okay?
Yeah, all right.
Blake,
guys.
Blake, thank you very much for your time.
Yep, thanks for having me on, guys.
Okay.
Thank you, Blake.
See you guys.
Bye, guys.